my two stories. I mean, yeah, yeah. Daddy, don't worry. She's actually showed card. She's like, my best friend Jordan sits right beside me, and I can look right on her papers.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're ready to reconvene. The lights are on and all board members are seated.
So, there you go.
So I'll call to order this workshop for today at 3:51 p.m. We'll be discussing District Strategic Plan Goal 4, become a model continuous improvement organization, and we'll be entertaining budget discussions with Dr. Atkins and Dr. Desamore.
Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started just to talk about this workshop a little bit in terms of what we are hoping to achieve here. And again, I just wanted to emphasize to the board that, and apologize, I think I did not anticipate this afternoon's discussion, but it was very good, a robust discussion on a number of issues. But, you know, obviously my hope is to give the board maximum amount of time to talk about budget priorities. So as we get into this workshop today, we do have opportunity to schedule additional time. And we purposely left time available on the 16th because we have one issue on the 16th workshop. But if we do not have enough time to finish, we can make a choice to either roll over to the 16th or schedule additional time on a different day. The primary goals as we see this particular workshop, and I'd give the board an opportunity to jump in. First of all is to determine this board's priorities relative to the School District of Lee County's budget for fiscal year FY18. It's also to really secure district support from the board and seek input from the board relative to the district strategic plan and expenditures that are focused on specific strategic targets and objectives for Vision 2020. So in other words, we have recommended certain expenditures that we are definitely considering, but would like you to weigh in as well. And finally, we would like to discuss alternative strategies for raising additional revenue for the school district, include such things as sales tax, impact fees, and other vehicles that we might use as a district, because certainly if you look at what's going on at the state level, it does not bode well right now for additional funding. And then, of course, our capital situation, particularly with the one piece of legislation that potentially takes $8.3 million out of our budget, only worsens the situation. It does not look better. So all these discussions and part of the board are very timely for us because we, as Dr. Desamore will tell you, are really in the middle of our budget process right now. So we're at a critical juncture where your input is really important. Now, some secondary goals as we see this particular workshop would be to update the board as in terms of the relative status of the budget discussions at the state level, which Mrs. Fisher did a little bit, and Amy will get into and just touch on it, and then provide the board with a very, very brief update relative to where we are as a district staff as it relates to this current budget process. So our objective for our part is to be very brief, to maximize your opportunity to be able to talk about the issues. Before I turn it over to Dr. Desamore, are there any other primary goals or secondary goals that I might have missed for this particular workshop? Okay, hearing none, I will turn it over to Dr. Desamore to start out with a legislative update and our budget process and priorities.
Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Atkins and members of the board. Can you all hear me? Okay, very good. So as Dr. Atkins said in that introduction, we plan on doing very little talking and a lot more listening. We had quite a bit of information that we gave at the last budget workshop that we did. So we have just a little bit of updates, some highlights for you, and then hopefully we'll get into a very good conversation where we can hear from you all where you are on a number of issues. So first of all, to give that legislative budget update, and as Ms. Fisher stated a little bit earlier, and she did a very good job, so thank you, Ms. Fisher, of covering what really is going on at the legislative level right now. This PowerPoint, of course, was made and distributed before we got the latest information, so we know now we can look at the bottom half of the slide, which is probably where we'll end up coming out. So as you can see, 16 million about additional dollars is and I certainly don't mean to sound unappreciative, but it's not a lot when you look at the fact that when we're looking at almost 1,600 new students to come in. Of that $16 million, you're looking at about 8 million at least that you're going to need just to support the new students that are coming in. So you're looking at a little more than half of that dollar amount that you need for new students, and then
How many new students?
almost 1,600 new students next year.
Yeah.
We are projecting. So it will be next year a tight budget year in terms of determining what are our resources available, how are we going to utilize those resources, and what priorities are going to be most important for us. So it makes this conversation very, very timely and very important. So when we look at the budget progress that we've made, the school allocations have been released. There's a whole personnel timeline in terms of when people have to be reappointed and or non-reappointed. That action usually happens around April timeframe. So those allocations have been released so that schools have the information that they need in order to make their decisions that they need to make. We have received department requests, and the review of those are in process. And so when we talk about this conversation about priorities, of course, that's where much of this is going to come in. We have, as we've noted, only a certain amount of revenue and competing requests in terms of what departments have asked for that, of course, exceed the amount of money that we have. So comparing those requests to the priorities, determining what we believe is most important, and funding those things we believe are most important is really where we're trying to get to in terms of the budget for next year. The student assignment batch was run and has been analyzed, and so for those, we looked at that batch compared to our projections, and we did make very little adjustment between what the projection was and what the batch showed us. So of course, at this point, most of the schools are down underneath our projection, but that would be expected because this is very early in the process. Of course, school isn't out, and we've got a long summer before we get ready to start school in August, and so we expect a lot of kids to come in during that time. So our revenue and expense assumptions are still in process. Of course, we now know a little bit more about what we plan on getting from the legislature, but then we also have some other pieces of revenue that we have to deal with, such as in our capital budget and within our federal grants. And then based on that, try to make some decisions related to the budget as well. And then our fund balance estimates are in process. These are important because we need to know how much were we on target this year in terms of what we expected to spend versus what we did spend. Do we have any additional dollars left over from this year that can help us in terms of our budgeting process for next year? What really do those reserves look like? And so that's where our budget process stands right now. So when we talk about our budget priorities, the Vision 2020 really defines what our budget priorities are, but of course that document is broad and there are many things within there. And so some specific priorities have to be outlined in terms of what do we believe this year is most important so that we can target our resources towards there to the extent that we can. And so there was a process that we went through at the chief's level with our principal leads and also with representative teachers on our teacher advisory committee to ask about priorities and where they felt priorities should stand. And that the results of those questions you see in your budget backup. And if I could go to that for just a moment. You'll see here what the results were in terms of the chiefs and where we stood in terms of where we thought the priorities were. And goal 1, which of course is student achievement, and goal 3, which is increasing retention of effective and highly effective employees, are the 2 goals that came to the top, and you see where that breakout is for each of those goals. When you look at the principal leads and the teachers, they were asked 3 key questions. First of all, they were asked if they could change, if that individual could change one thing at their school, what would it be? And they had to choose from a list. And then they had to ask then they were asked from a budget perspective, list the top 3 areas where they personally could use additional support at their location. And then the last question was, with competing priorities, where do you believe the top 5 priorities should be from a district perspective? So those were the 3 key questions that each of those groups, the principals and the teachers, were asked. And so you see what the individual results of those were for both the principals and the teachers. And then in the very last document, you kind of see where, when we put them together, you could kind of compare what both the principals and the teachers said and what how they compare to each other. So basically, just to kind of highlight that, you see where in the areas where it was the items are highlighted, those are the priorities or the individual topics that, for all the votes with the principals and the teachers, those are the things that rose to the top. So you see those things highlighted. And so,
Just one comment. I did look at some of this data in a little bit more granular fashion, and I've developed some pie charts that kind of focus on individual responses. So I think what that will allow us to do is to drill down a little bit more, and because some of these are broad categories, and this can kind of help us to focus a little bit more on what those expenditures should look like. We also did get input. All of our chiefs talked about Vision 2020 and the targets that they felt had the highest priority. And then just last week, we also brought, Amy did a great job with our superintendent's executive roundtable with presenting this data to them, and then we produced a survey that we sent out to our roundtable that Dr. Carlin and Cassie Bishop are compiling that information, and I'll bring that to you as well.
So based on these specific priorities, and the ones that were highlighted are basically the ones that you see listed here on this slide. And we wanted to point out a couple of things that we were doing in each of these priorities or things that are being considered right now in the budget process to address or match up with these priorities. So first of all, with that focus on academics and student achievement, there has been a lot of work done in terms of doing some research and comparisons across the district to come up with a list of new curriculums that have been identified to address academic trends that the superintendent has presented to all of our district leadership in terms of, okay, we have a trend, how can we address that? What do we need? What kind of materials and what kind of processes do we need to address those? And so a list of new curriculums have been identified by our experts in those areas, and the price tag related to those now, we are still in the process of doing some negotiations, but it could be in the range of $7 to $9 million. And so we are, so that would be something that would be outlined as addressing those priorities, and one of that has, of course, one of the top priorities, and that's an example of one of the things that we have in the budget right now, in the budget discussion in terms of, okay, this is a high priority, how can we accomplish this given the revenue that we have now? As far as teacher retention and professional development, there is a focus on training with a revamp of staff development, both training in terms of curriculum, which will definitely be needed if we take on these new curriculums, because there will have to be much training for our teachers and our leadership to understand how to best implement those items in the classroom. And then from the staff perspective as well, to focus on retention. One of the things that the teachers highlighted in terms of trying to keep our teachers here is saying, hey, look, we need to focus on retention and instructional support for our teachers in the classroom. So one of the things that we're looking at in the budget in order to support that. For ESE support and qualified support staff, we have allocated within the school budget additional ESE support at the schools and also additional ESOL support at schools, mostly in the form of paraprofessionals, which matches up to what the teachers pointed out as being one of their highest, or actually the highest priority in the 2 first questions when it asked, when we asked, what do you need, what would be the one thing that you would change at your school, and what would be the top 3 things that the district could provide you at your location. For both questions, their number 1 answer was more highly qualified instructional support personnel. personnel. And so those two things would be in direct support of that. And then also funding for additional training for both our teachers and support staff in terms of behaviors for kids, being able to give additional mechanisms for our staff to be able to support our children who need some support in that area. So additional training and certifications in that area is another thing another priority that is being balanced right now within our budget. And then as far as technology, many of the curriculums that I mentioned when we're talking about the focus on academic and student achievement, much of that curriculum comes really in software form. So it's not the traditional textbook in a lot of cases. It is in additional software that would need to be used by our teachers and our students. So training on that, as well as the hardware that our schools need to support that. And of course, the hardware for the one-to-one initiative is another focus in terms of technology, and also the modernization of the infrastructure that we have behind those systems, including our mainframe system, is another piece that we have within our budget to support what our principals and teachers have asked for. So I'll pause right there. Do I have some questions?
Board
So,
members? No?
think we're saving it for later.
Okay, all right. It looked like it might, okay, all right. So in terms of our next steps then, of course, first, we are here to have this board conversation, hoping that, as Dr. Atkins said in the beginning, we presented a lot of information in the beginning. We're only going to talk a little bit because we want to make sure that you all as a board have the opportunity to have a conversation about whether there is agreement from you as a whole on those priorities, whether we are missing some and need to make sure that we add some, what your expectations are for what you see, for what you want to see from here on out in terms of a preliminary budget or any other budget information that we submit to you, as well as conversation on additional revenue raising and how we might do that in the future. And then, I'm sorry, Dr. Atkins.
I'll just, and one thing I wanted to say for this conversation, I've asked key staff members to attend this particular workshop, not only just to hear the priorities of the board, but also if more specific questions, if you have more specific questions that you'd like to ask, they are available to come forward and share their expertise.
And then we'll look forward to the final legislative information, which may come at the end of this week or may come on a special session. We're waiting to hear what that outcome might be. We have some hard work in order to balance our budget and some decisions to make in terms of our revenue, how we utilize that, and what priorities and how we focus our resources. And then, of course, looking forward to presenting you a preliminary budget at our last meeting in June, and then going forward a tentative budget approval in July, and then a final budget approval in September. So with that, we really wanted to begin with conversation.
Mr. Toiver.
Thank you. And for 2 years now, Dr. Atkins, we've promised that we're going to do some things different. We're going to find out exactly how much we need in each department, roll it up and say, these are the dollars that we need per department. So now we're in May, and this board has not seen any numbers. In other words, we're waiting to see, well, let's see what the state gives us and figure out how it applies. I want to know, based upon, in 2015 to 2016, we had salaries went from 522 to last year's budget to 586. $64 million we increased in salaries. That's a 12% increase. How did that happen? Where did that money come from? And all of the monies, when we talk about our supplies, it went from 17 million to 37 million, which is a $20 million increase. These numbers just expand to the number that we're given, and we can't keep expanding to the number where we're given and telling the people we don't have enough money, because they want to know, what are you doing with the money that you have? I want to see in May, right now, before any budget's out, how much money do you need to run this district? If they could give you, and again, and I don't doubt that as Dr. Desmore says, the number's probably going to be way in excess of the number that they're going to give us. Okay, we understand that. But then I want to know, so give me the number, and if it's 1.9 billion, I'm okay with that. But we need to see that, and we need to see where is that money getting allocated, because then we're going to look at last year's budget and say, it went from this to this. Now, the only thing, the rationale that I've heard so far, Dr. Desmore said, we've got an $8 million $8 million is going to get absorbed in 1,600 kids. Well, that's good. That means it's about $5,000 per student. Because my question to you is, every child gets $7,300, whatever that number is per child. But that's not linear. In other words, at some point, your resources, adding 2 extra children to a school, does not increase as much as when you have to provide a new school and the new seats and so on. So there has to be variable cost and non-variable cost for every additional student. What are those numbers? I want to know how much for every student that walks in our door, what is the variable cost and what is the non-variable cost for every additional student? And we should know that. I mean, that is just hard data. And it's really easy to compute, and we can have, not only can we know what it's going to be for this year, plus or minus a few percentage, but we should have historical analysis to say, over the last few years, every student that came in, how much was the incremental cost? So then we have to say, okay, now, as far as the supplies, why are we increasing in supply cost more than the increase in student numbers? In other words, are we going after price reductions for, our supplies? Are they going up or down? In other words, I want to know every single department. If they're asking for more money than last year, I want to know why. And that's what I thought since October that we've been going through that process. I want to see the data. I want to see the number they had last year. I want to see the number they had this year from every single department in this district. And it's going to probably be a book this thick, and I'm good with that. But this board, and me in particular, we're looking at the point and trying to tell the public we don't have enough money. And I can't say that without knowing where our money went and where it's being spent and where it's going for this year. And then once we find out what our budget is, then we can actually say that, we needed and justifiably, we may say we need $1.9 billion. And these are the reasons, because of the new retentions that we're doing and so on. I'm okay with it as long as we can support it. And then when we have to make the cuts, we can, with transparency, say we wanted to do this type of things and we can't do it because the state legislature is just going to do what they did last year and give us the same number, and this is how it's going to hurt us. If we don't have that, be able to speak that intelligently, then we're never going to get out of that cyclical issue of the people saying, well, you don't need any more money. Well, I can tell you, sitting up here for as long as I have, I don't believe we have enough money, but I don't believe we're going through the process properly enough to be able to demonstrate, so I can speak with any type of intelligence to say where we're spending our money.
Okay, well, if I could have an opportunity to respond. First of all, I would take a little exception to your comments. I believe that for us to arrive at some of the recommendations that we have made, I have asked staff to provide more rationale than ever that we've ever seen in the last, I've been part of this for 15 years. And, sometimes the budget process was just a matter of everybody go cut 3%. And I'm like, well, what about the strategic plan? No, we have to cut 3%. So that's what we had to do. We just cut, and everybody had to give up their 3%. Now, some divisions had open positions because they were huge. Administrative services always was able to look great because they had all these positions that were open. They just cut. HR, very small division, had to really sit next to people and give them the reason why they were letting them go. What this group has been able to do is we have required that you have to not only triangulate to identify what is the rationale behind a strategic decision that you're making, but go beyond that, because you have to not only be able to show me the numbers as to why your department needs this increase, you have to show me the rationale why that increase is greater need than another increase from another department. You have to also show that what you are providing is research-based. Okay, so don't give me something that some vendor comes out to you and says, this is great, look at the research that we've provided. No, you're expected to provide peer-reviewed information in cases where we have it that shows strategically this is the best decision possible in this particular situation. We've also gone beyond that to get more shareholder input into this process, teacher advisory, superintendent's executive roundtable, department board priority. Hopefully, we'll continue to have a really good discussion around this, and other groups as well. So that they can provide principal lead's the one I couldn't think of. So they're providing their input into this budget process, so that when we are making these decisions, that for our kids, that this public is confident that these are good decisions. So yes, my goal is to make sure that you can go out there with a great degree of confidence as a board member and to be able to sell this particular budget to a population that is quite cynical probably about government overall. That's just an American thing going on right now, I think. You need to be able to do that, and so that is certainly our goal to do that. Now, there's a lot of numbers here, because I will tell you that just the budget requests that came in from the department filled a binder that was that thick. It started out at $29 million. I think last time I talked to Amy, it was like $9 million. I made them go through literally the DMAIC process to get to those figures. And in addition to that, just speaking of DMAIC, a lot of them suffered through 3 days of Greenbelt training, and today of which was one of the last days, or you got another one coming up?
Yeah, for a while.
For now. So I think we can do that for you. Part of us wanting to do that, though, is to get your additional feedback on what you're looking for as a board, in terms of what you think the top priorities are. I think also for me to be able to provide a persuasive argument to this board why this is a strategic expenditure that we need. So I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree with what you're saying, because it has been asked for, but I also feel that like no other time in my 15 years have I asked for, as any superintendent asked for, departments and division chiefs to provide this much rationale why they want to do what they want to do. And there's still more work that we need to do to come up with a final document, but I certainly am here to get your input as we refine that. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my response.
Well,
Thank you, Dr. Atkins.
just to respond to Dr. Atkins, and I appreciate that, and I didn't mean any disrespect, because I know you guys are doing a lot of work, and I probably know for the workhorse department that we have in finance with Dr. Desamore, for them to work even harder, you don't almost think it's possible, but they are, and I understand that, and I know the process that you're going through with all the departments and asking for this, and I know you're committed to that. My issue is, what I'd like to see is, while you're going through that process, give us when somebody submits a budget, when we just get the framework, don't wait until, we have tried to get a 1.763, whatever our number comes to now. And again, it really doesn't matter to me what numbers it comes out to until we see it. But for us to try to digest it in May and approve it in July and September, it just doesn't give us enough time. And so when you're starting in October, when the departments bring in their initial budgets, send it to the board, just so we can see what the budgets, and again, just say, look, these are just their wishes. Don't have a heart attack. This is just what they want. So at least now then we can see that process, and then when they go through the justifications, and then we don't even really need to see all of that backup data unless a particular board member says there's a special interest on why they're making this justification, or it's going to the 2020 plan. But for us to see it evolve so that we can actually see where it is, so the numbers just all of a sudden just don't appear, and we have to try to digest that immense work that you did over 10 months in a month and a half. That's my point.
Understood.
Great. Mrs. Morgan?
Yeah, I think there are two different problems here, and I think you're addressing one. We've asked that you align your recommendations for the budget with the strategic plan. That has been a top priority, and that you have done. That is for this budget, so that we're able to go out and say that the funds we have, we are spending well. And I think the work that was done just figuring out what the priorities are was a terrific start, and I have a lot of appreciation for what the staff has done. I think the other thing that we need to do is to say, okay, and this is not to me, this is not part of the budget process. To me, this is part of long-range financial planning. And that is to say, given that we have these things, if we were to put a price tag on all of this, what would it be? And that's what you go out and talk to the community about when it comes to long-term. So I think we're wrapping two things up together when we really need to be tackling. I think what you're trying to do is tackle two things, and maybe some of us heard you rolling it all up as one. So I'm hearing it as budget, and I get what you're doing, and I also hear that you are prepared as a financial planning process to tackle all of this, but not as part of the budget process. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you.
Board members? Mrs. Patrica?
Looking at your budget priorities, I don't see how any one of them is separate from the other. You know, I mean, everything on your budget priorities supports number one, which is focus on academics and student achievement. Your description of technology, Dr. Desamours, was different from how I envision technology, which is part of the overall IS department here. I see incredible opportunities for efficiencies there, which will free up money for other areas of the district. And I think it's going to take time for us to realize those efficiencies, but I think we're headed on the right track. A little bit of frustration. I didn't mention that I went to SAC meeting at Estero High School last night. Frustration with textbooks, and I know that there's a lot of state mandates or requirements surrounding our choice of textbooks, but is it true that when we order an electronic textbook, we only have that license for 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Why, a district of our size, can we negotiate? Do we have aren't we in a better,
Let me,
please?
I can address a piece of the negotiation if we're okay.
Yeah,
Looking back
I was- yeah.
at they did, like, for example, this reading, the reading initiative that we're putting forward. You heard Dr. Desamours talk about the potential range of where that negotiation can go. Our staff did some significant negotiation as it related to that request, if we were to approve that request. And what they talked about from a negotiating perspective is a very valid one. I mean, we're a very large district. We have a very, very large footprint in the industry. We are standing to do business with you over a multiple number of years. You need to take that in consideration when it comes to what you're asking in terms of a price. And, again, they're in negotiations, so I don't want to spit out, specific numbers. However, I'm very pleased with the work of Mr. Davis, Mr. Alton, and his staff in terms of being able to use some of those arguments to literally drive down the initial retail cost of something that's something more reasonable, and that's not always something we've seen in the past, but we're certainly seeing it now, which gives us I think a strategic advantage being a district this size with the purchases size that we do.
So in the description of technology that I was giving, I was trying to address both the responses that we got in the surveys, which from the teachers seemed to center around both the software they had to use, the types of technology that they had the access to, like such as more Chromebooks at elementary, and also the training to support the use of those technology tools within the classroom. So that's kind of how the teachers spoke to it within the surveys that they responded to, but also talked about the modernization and efficiency, but also related to the modernization and efficiency really from the infrastructure perspective at the district level that basically supports all of that stuff behind it. So yes, as Dr. Atkins said, Mr. Davis and his staff are really, just right now blowing me out of the water in terms of the expectations, in terms of how he's been able to rework some of the items in the budget to support some of the initiatives that he has by really cutting out of what we had in the current budget, which is very, very impressive. And so he is here if you wanted to ask some, specific questions or wanted him to address some specific things related to that. Did you wanna
No, I
hear?
feel like I have a good feel for what he's doing. In terms of Mr. Toiber's comments, what I need to go out to the public, and I think we're going to talk about this in just a little while, is I'd like, you mentioned in one of our last meetings, an operational audit. And I'd like to see where we are in terms of that and where my fellow board members stand in terms of that. I can't, I mean, I feel like I have a good feel for what we're doing here, and I know there is obviously some waste in an organization of this size. You can't get away with no waste at all. But I also do feel like we're operating bare bones. But I need the data to be able to go out to the public and tell them that. And the audit will give me the data that I need to do that confidently. That's it.
Thank you. Mrs. Morgan?
I'm pulling a
I
Pam.
will.
Okay.
You're allowed.
No, what was I going to say? To the textbook thing, geez. Part of the problem that we have with replacing textbooks with technology is that the publishing companies have had to replace their funding stream from book publishing with making software available, trading it for software. So in effect, they have built pricing into the sale of technology that replaces textbooks, so that their bottom line doesn't change at all. Essentially, the cost to us does not reflect the cost to them. The cost to us reflects what kind of money they expect to make on what they sell for school materials.
But at the university level, the electronic books are significantly cheaper. And a student will buy a textbook and have it for life. So I don't understand why there's such a difference in pricing between K through 12 and post-secondary.
Well, you have, one of the major differences is you have an adoption process in the state of Florida. And if you look at the state adoption process, honestly, I'll just be blunt, the frustrating pieces about it is that often it'll narrow down to like one choice. Okay, Pearson, you're going to, that's the state adopted textbook. So we've already got legislation lined up that requires us to use technology, and they've already got the product ready, and that's the one that has been recommended, and off you go. It is a system that I just, is just disgusting is the only word to describe it. It is not just a Florida problem, however, this is a national problem. The amount of money that goes into textbooks across this country is just absolute phenomenal. So Mrs. Morgan is correct. They had this all figured out before they even passed the technology legislation, so that they were all ready for this, so there was no way for K-12 to utilize textbooks in a manner that's similar to at the university level. Now, I think with enough pressure, that's going to change, because the description you gave today would be a great way for us to go, and we do have some options as a district in terms of what we do. But if we go with a state adopted level, the pricing does lock us in certain cases. There is adoption and non-adoption materials, though, and then there's other supplemental materials that you can add in, and so it's not a simple fix, and it's not a simple problem.
No, it's not a simple problem.
You can guess just who was doing the lobbying for that legislation to come into play. And we're paying the price daily.
One of the things I just want to go back to quickly, and I'll just be very brief. Mr. Toiber talked about variable cost and non-variable cost, and Mrs. Morgan had talked about two pieces. Just give you one example of something that we're looking at, and I've asked Amy to actually work on. If you look at ELL students, okay, and you think about variable cost and fixed cost, there is a fixed cost to a student, but then you also have those variable costs. So right now, the formula is very simple. You have X number of ESOL students, this is what your allocation is going to be. We want it to be more complex than that because all ELL students are not created the same. They're different, and they have different needs. And we have to be able to do a better job with predicting what those needs are so we can allocate more accurately. So here's where we are today. Here's where we want to wind up next year at this time.
Mrs. Morgan.
And I want to respond to Ms. Patricka's suggestion about the operational audit. Dr. Adkins and I have had this conversation since he first came on board, and I know the newer board members may not be aware, but there are a variety of ways to do an operational audit. A full-blown operational audit. So I did some research from, basic KPI up through a full-blown operational audit. Full-blown operational audit would run this district approximately $850,000. The approach that the administration has taken is that we're going to start with KPIs and let's see what we find out. And I think you've already expanded, based on what you initially found out, you've already expanded the scope of the KPI to provide more information about the operation. So I think what's happening is the administration has started small and is working with its experience up to something larger as we know what our needs are in terms of doing an operational audit. That doesn't mean we shouldn't, as a board, have a conversation about operational audit, but I think, in fact, we are in the process of doing that. It's just in the background of everything else that's happening.
And just to piggyback on her comments, the KPIs went from 100 to now to 500. That's something that we've recently implemented. So we have 500 key performance indicators across all facets of district operations that we are, that we have keyed upon for us to be able to really make good judgments about how do we compare across the nation. That's one. As it relates to the operational audit, I did ask Dr. Desamores and staff to go out and look at operational audits and possible vendors for that. She has done that, and I think, we sat down with Gibson, and they, at the time we sat down, Gibson was looking at Hillsborough County. They have since performed that audit up in Hillsborough County, and Dr. Desamores has been in touch with their CFO up there, and so she has some feedback for you as well, and but has looked at other places. One of the things with Gibson's, and there are others out there that do that, Gibson is just one, but you can look at your KPIs and then you can ask for certain types of operational audits relative to your need. So we're certainly in the process of looking at that right now. That also, it allows you to be able to spend your dollars, I think, more wisely. And then, as I commented, I think at our last briefing, the beauty for us of doing that, as opposed to the model that the district had implemented some years ago, is that we can use nationally known experts to come in here and actually perform that audit and give us really good feedback on how we can certainly improve our operation. So I do think it is something that we definitely should explore. My experience has been that, while we want to grow our own where we can, we also benefit when we have outside expertise come in and share their wealth of knowledge with us as well. And that's what an operational audit would allow us to do, I think.
Great. Dr. Kuckel and then Mrs. Giovanelli.
The most exciting part of this presentation to me was your statement that says Vision 2020 defines budget priorities. And then as we went through, I saw a disconnect between that statement and the two documents that you presented, the Teachers Advisory Committee meeting and Vision 2020 Principal Lead and Teacher Budget Input. I think these are great, especially from another perspective. I think the Teacher Advisory one is pretty much a satisfaction survey as I look at it. And even on to Principal Lead and Teacher Budget Input, I think relates more to what I want about my job, what I'd like more of. So my thought on this is that if you do a broader survey, that the survey questions center around the 2020 budget priority areas. For example, and question number 1, if you could change one thing at your school, what would it be? I would change that to, if you could change one thing to better meet Goal 1, Target 1, what would it be? And Goal 2, Target 1, 2, 3, whatever, down the line. Because then the focus is not on what you do every day and what you like and what you don't like, but around how do we better meet the Vision 2020, and then it truly becomes that. So then you would even want to select your audience that you would submit this survey to based on the questions that you're asking. For example, if you're asking questions about what would better help you in the classroom in a general level, then that really falls under increased retention of employees, because you're asking them what they need personally to be more committed, to be more professional, to better be able to do their job, but that's not specific to what could they do better to accomplish Goal 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's where I'd like to see the connection made as we move down the line in terms of departments talking about what they want to do, but relating that to one or more of the target goals that it will impact them, or they will impact in the Vision 2020 plan. I'd like to see a closer connection there.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kuckel. Mrs. Giovanelli.
And just back to the audit, I still think that it would be cheaper to hire, for the school board to hire their own auditor and work with the superintendent's auditor and get our numbers together and work together and be cohesive and collectively and arrive at what our budget expenses really are. And that's all the community wants to know is what we're spending, how we're spending it, and how much more do we need to really be not so in debt for the past X amount of years that we are. So I think it's still cheaper to employ someone that we trust, and the community will trust our judgment, and it'll be cheaper than the operational audit. And then if we don't like it, it's a 1-year contract, and it doesn't work, then we change it again. And that's my opinion, but that's where I would go with that. And I think it'd be cheaper on the community.
Well, obviously with, district staff, we've worked under both scenarios and would be, any audit. I mean, even when the board used to work with the clerk of courts, you would get some good feedback. And they certainly don't have expertise in all facets of our organization, but they are able to come in as an external person and really with kind of an objective fashion give you an opinion about your operation and how you might want to improve. So, I don't want to, when I talk about the operational audit, I'm just talking about the level of expertise that you potentially could bring in that situation. But it is a disadvantage. It's typically expensive, and it's a one-time. And one of the things that Hillsborough has struggled with is that would happen in any audit is if they come in and they mention something that you may not really have the stomach to implement. Example, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they looked at making some adjustments to class size. They came in there and looked at their class size and said, you might want to up your class size a little bit, and I think that met with some resistance, something that board really didn't want to do, and then you're dealing with the taxpayer saying, well, that you can save some money if you do that, why don't you do that? So anyway, again, either scenario I think has its advantages and disadvantages, and we can work with either one.
Great. I think Mrs. LaRiviere, did you have your hand up?
Well, I have all, in the meantime of listening to the whole conversation, I have several different key points that come to me. I like the idea of having someone on the outside, should we go with an operational audit. And this is the reason why. There is no way that we could hire our own internal auditor that would have expertise in all the areas that we need to be checked into. And so that part, and I do appreciate and I fully understand working with the KPIs first, and so we can identify where our needs are so that we can have those areas fully checked into. It will be less expensive, but it will also help us be more proactive, not only in a 3-year strategic plan, but also long-term, long-range planning. So that's my sharing of my input regarding that. And a suggestion, as you were looking at the input, we have input from principal leads, and we have input from teachers. There is nothing that encompasses input from parents and those stakeholders. And I believe that if we were to have parents look at this, they would probably view things a little bit differently. You can look through here and you can see, I see okay, everyone has a different worldview. We each have a different perspective we come to with how we're going to work with our spending our money. Principals definitely have one focus. Our teachers have a focus, but we also have our parents. And parents are also able, we have some very wise parents out there that can think outside of just my own personal world, but are able to look at that whole piece, whether it be in a situation like utilizing some DAC members or whatever. And with the one surprise to me is that mental health didn't come up as a key priority. And I found that very interesting when we consider many of the issues that our students are facing. And our staff, I don't believe any of our staff members feel fully confident and competent for helping to address some of those issues with the students. So that's just an observation I made, and I want to put that out there.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Atkins.
I was going to just mention that, one thing that you do have to remember is that the very limited in terms of who it wasn't really like an official survey. It was mentioned in one of the groups I'm looking for. I've got the specific responses in front of me. Yeah, mental health did have 2 responses, 2 people that listed it as a top 3 area for district support. So 2 of our principal leads picked up on that and mentioned mental health as an area. Overall, though, part of it is, we struggle with, we are looking at our data, and we are making some decisions relative to the data. For example, I think I've shared with all of you the data, the student achievement data over the last 4 years, and what we want to do to address that student achievement slide in many, many areas. And then it's a matter of going out and I think, surveying folks in terms of their input, and I don't want to discount any opinion, but there are people that live in this world and look at the data and talk about the data, and that's their profession. And then you have folks who you're really trying to get support for, I think, some of those decisions that we're making down here. In other words, this is the right thing for us to do from a reading perspective. I wouldn't imagine we would go out and have a survey where, our teacher advisory, in fact, they didn't bring up reading, quote, as an example, or a parent may come up with reading, but they probably come up with a lot of other things.
Exactly right. And I was just thinking of it a way, as we look at it, to triangulate data and pull all the pieces together. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying mental health is right up there with the same issue as intensive reading materials. So please understand, I fully get and understand that. I'm just finding it's an interesting place to notice that, And I saw that some did. And it's just an observation. That was just an observational piece, so please understand that. If you were to ask me where my top priority is, it's to get that money into the training for those teachers who need to be trained to help meet the needs of those students for the intensive instruction in both reading, math, and it also does cover the science as well. But I believe if we target the reading piece, the science will be easily taken care of in many ways. But our district took a back turn a few years ago. And when someone told principals to get rid of all the materials, some principals did. Wisely, some did not, and held on to them. Thankfully, we have those materials around and people are able to get them to help our kids. But our students are struggling. Our ELL students are struggling, as well as our ESE students. And I just really, I think that's where we need to, that's my priority, and I've already shared that with you. I will do anything for those pieces to come back. I don't know if I will give you all the money, but I will do anything I can to help that.
Thank you, Mrs. LaRiviere. Mrs. Patrica.
We've talked a bit about debt. Dr. Atkins, I don't know if you want to share with us the feedback that you've gotten from your roundtable of business leaders about debt. It's my understanding that the feedback was, first of all, our level of debt is not remotely alarmingly high. Second, the debt that we took on was at very good rates. So we'd be crazy to pay that off at this point. From a business perspective, that makes sense to me. So our existing debt is not a concern for me. Do you want to speak to that? Did I mischaracterize?
Sure, yeah, I can absolutely do that. One of the things, yes, we did go out to our executive roundtable, and then specific even broke out to even smaller group that was really focused on, comes from the financial world, and Dr. Desamours really opened the books and shared everything with our budget with them. So and these folks took the time to really go through it. So I have to commend them on their efforts to really give us some really good feedback. And they said, look, it would be great to be debt-free. However, you're not in that position right now. And you're in a growth mode. You are looking at incredibly low interest rates. You can borrow using COPS at a very low level. So in our opinion, that you should be borrowing to meet the needs of your students. In addition to that, we have looked at where is our district relative to other districts in terms of its debt capacity. And this board really set a threshold of 50%. We can go up to 75% of those capital of the 1.5 mil. We are below that, and as a result, we are in a very good financial position in terms of our borrowing capacity in this district. And if you look from district to district to district to district, particularly those growth districts, none of the growth districts have a lower debt capacity than we do. They all have a higher debt capacity, the ones that are real growth districts. The ones that are debt-free, often you'll find districts that are not growing. And, by the way, we are one of only 6 school districts across the state that do not have some other supplemental revenue stream to help with capital dollars, whether it's a half-penny sales tax or some other, and these districts do and still carry more debt than we do. So, that's something that we do talk about, but I don't think we talk about enough. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. In one of the previous briefings that we did, we had that comparison of where our debt was versus other districts. And at that point, the superintendent's recommendation was, well, we could take on some additional debt basically for the building of our new schools if our board was in agreement with that. But then showing the numbers that demonstrated that even that additional borrowing still doesn't fill the hole or the need that we have. And so whatever approach we take, it really has to be a multifaceted approach with some additional debt, but then also the, hopefully at some point, some additional revenue to help sustain, the growth and the maintenance needs that we have.
Which leads to the second part of my comment, which is time. You know, we're talking about an operational audit, and we're talking about, okay, we're getting our ducks in a row to get it done. We are 18 months away from an election.
Right.
And I feel like we're running out of time. And if we're going to do an operational audit, we have to do it so that I can go to the public and say, with confidence, we need a half-cent sales tax in order to raise money to build schools and meet capital needs. We are 18 months away. I am 6 months away from running my own campaign for an election, and that was a 2-year process. And this board is going to have to work their butts off to get out there with the information. We don't have the information.
Right.
And I feel like we're running out of time.
Mr. Toiver.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. And to the debt issue first, and I was very glad that we have Fortune 500 people on your roundtable that understand the paradigm of a nonprofit public entity the size that we are. There is a debt capacity issue and a debt operational issue that most don't run out of debt for a reason. It's the value of money. And it's also a strategic reason why we stay below 5.0, because we're probably one of the very few school districts, and Dr. Desmore can correct me if I'm wrong, that have the AAA bond rating that affords us to get us the type of ratings that we get when we go after cops. You know, there's a lot of districts that borrow money at a much less desirable rate than we do. You know, Jerry Ford has been very good instructing us and working, and all of our financial people have been very good with us, telling us the double-edged sword about borrowing too much and borrowing too little to keep where we need to be in that sweet spot to be able to get good money when we need money. So I really appreciate our financial people and the financial advisors that we use, Mr. Olitz, Mr. O.
Mr. Ford?
What's Greg's?
Olive. Mike Olive, is that who you're
No,
talking
he used to be with us, and then he's now with one of the financial groups.
about? Michael
Talking about
Olive.
Michael.
Michael Olive, yes. You know, Michael Olive and his team and all of them, they're just constantly watching us to make sure where we are. So I appreciate the groups that we use. And that goes back to the professional people that we use. When we have an internal auditor, there is just no way with the complexity and size of our business that we can have an auditor that would serve us to any degree of competency. It's just, that person's just not out there. And even auditors, I want to be very careful to this board that just to, even when you get an auditor, there are specific auditors that do specific things. And even when you find the right auditor for the right focus scope on this particular task that we want to do on an operational audit, the nuances and complexities of the Lee County school system, we had a transportation audit back in 2007, 2008. It was horrendous. They didn't have a clue on some of the things that we had to deal with, both by our state regulations and by the demographics and schedules and time constraints that we had within our system. That, I mean, they gave us some good ideas, and we did glean some very positive things from them. But, you know, when I first saw the 13 pages of their report, that I actually, you know, Googled and found that same 13 pages as their precipice, their fluff stuff in some audit in Kentucky, you know, it kind of gave me a little bit of, you know, a bad taste in my mouth. It's like, you know, they're just regenerating this stuff, so we got to be very careful. And then the data that they gave us, you know, again, 40 or 30% of it was just stuff that just couldn't be implemented here at all, and it was just inherently impossible. So we have to really understand as a board that it's a tool, but we can't rely that this can't be the only thing that we need.
No.
So that's my audit piece. My next thing is as far as seeing this as a budget audit, I want to talk about two things. Number one, I want to talk about impact fees. We had talked about our impact fees, and this board seems to be pushing the fact that we should have it 100% restored. And that's a political issue that this board will have to consider if we, you know, and the biggest thing was we have to get over the hurdle of the county commission. I've been speaking with the county commission, and I'm continuing to speak with them, and I believe if this board wants to go that route, one of the options that we may have with the county commission is, and they offered it to us several years ago, is that they're willing to give us the whole ball of wax. They say, you want to raise it, you go ahead and raise it, and you go ahead and control it. And they can change their county ordinance to allow us to be the one that sets the limit on the amount of money. It becomes a political issue if we want to do that. Aside from that, you know, we're continually battling the county commission. But also a part of that is, and I had Mr. Moore run the numbers for me, in the last, from October of 16 to February of 17, the problem with the impact fees is 13% of the money raised in the impact fees are in the zone where we can apply the money. We have 52% of the money that's being raised currently is in the west zone. We're not gonna build in the west zone. So we're gonna raise impact fees, and it's gonna, my dad used to always say, be careful what you wish for, because happiness is getting what you want and wanting it after you get it. We get to raise 100% of our impact fees, and it doesn't help our construction, then we're fighting a battle, we're dying on the wrong hill. So,
Steve, can that money be used for capital improvements in those?
no, it's only for, well, yeah, it can be for, if we want to do the capital upgrades, we could. But we just don't have that type, I mean, just in those last years, the monies, we're talking about a substantial, going 100% is like $20 million. And if you think 52% of that, $10 million would be in the West. Now, if we wanted to go down this road, we might want to consider, a two-tacit approach, saying, look, we'll take it over, but we also want the county ordinance to change to give us the flexibility that once we raise it, we can apply it anywhere. And I'm going to defer to Mr. Martin as far as the applicability, but I believe Mr. Moore has already had that discussion with Mr. Martin. We can do that if the county is willing to make that change. So it would be a twofold change, that not only could we raise it, but then we could apply it. That gives us extra revenue source that we're already entitled to do without having to go, one of the things I think Ms. Patrica was alluding to is, we have to make sure that we say that we've done everything we possibly can do that's been given to us by the state legislature. Now, I understand there's going to be a whole lot of political folks out there, our construction industry, and a lot of people that are looking at building new houses that may not like this answer. But again, we only have certain places upon which to draw funds, and we're going to do, and I'm going to talk about another one that the county commission's doing in a second, but we're doing the things about selling naming rights, and anything we can put a plaque on, we're going to sell, and we're doing it on the web, and we're doing everything we can do as a board, which I think is the first time, what I've heard from anywhere else in the state, nobody is as aggressive as we are as far as trying to generate that type of money. If we try to change with the county commission, that may be something else to say, look, we don't like it any more than anybody else does. We don't like to put it on, tax a certain budget. But that may be something to do. And then my next point of that was, in that conversation, and Mr. Martin can answer that, is there a way to make the impact fees, right now the impact fees, you're paying the same impact fees whether you're building in Fort Myers, where we want to have the growth, and we really don't want the growth out in the outlying, where the growth is now, that we could actually do a graduated impact fee. In other words, if you build down in the area where the county commission wants to do their PDP plan, we would, you'd pay $100 impact fee. If you build out in Elva, you're going to pay a $5,000 impact fee. In other words, we try to direct our growth based upon how we apply our impact fees based upon our growth plan of where we have schools and where we don't have schools. Just a question.
All right, a few different issues there. Let me try to address them, I think, in reverse. Let me address the last question first. The concept of an impact fee is based upon impact, the impact that new residence causes on the need for new student stations. That doesn't vary by where you choose to build. The impact is based upon how many new students that residence generates, and is based upon an average. So there are defensibility issues that would prevail if you have different rates of collection of an impact fee based upon the location in different parts of the county. Second issue with respect to where the funds are spent, yes, the present ordinance requires expenditure of the funds in the zones in which they are collected. That's not the case with every school impact fee ordinance across the state. Many of them provide for the opportunity to spend anywhere within the school district. Basically, what you have to prove in order to have defensible impact fee and use of that impact fee is that the fee payer is gaining a benefit from the manner in which the fee is used to increase student stations, to add student stations. And in other school districts in other counties, they have believed that there's a sufficient rationale that the adding of student stations any place in the school district provides benefit to the fee payer and any other location in the school district, because obviously it opens up capacity in schools that may be closer to where they reside. So that is an option. That would require a change in the ordinance. We have had some discussion in the past about the first issue they introduced with respect to the school district, the school board taking over the authority with respect to imposition of a school impact fee. I have constitutional concerns about that. The county, the municipalities are the land use, the zoning authority, who makes the decision with respect to issuance of building permits, zoning approvals, and that is the time at which impact fees are collected, when that approval to build is issued, that building permit. You will not find an example of that occurring anywhere else in the state of Florida, where the school board has taken over that authority to impose and make direct decisions with respect to school impact fees. So I have some level of concern as to whether that's constitutionally defensible. I can't point you to clear authority that says yes or no, because again, it has not occurred in the state of Florida, but that is one I would be cautious about. I think that we would need to coordinate with legal services at the county and thoroughly investigate that if that's a possibility that both the county and the school board are interested in.
And the last issue before I open that up to conversation is the county also did something, and I know we had discussions with Mr. Desjardins as far as they were actually capturing the increase in property value from one year to the next, and taking those funds and identifying those funds as a separate fund, and using those funds unrestricted, and be able to use that fund as the board could use, that could be actually moved to our capital issues or anything we could do. And I know there was conversations had, but I don't know, and this has been going on for a year, this last year, they had $41 million of unrestricted funds based upon the property values that they could just use to, go do roads wherever they wanted to do, and the county commission could do it without any restrictions. And I think that would be something that this board, I think, would have interest in using that same mechanism, and kind of an update on where that is with us doing it.
Are you talking about growth increment funding?
Yes.
Yeah, we did implement a growth increment funding model in the school district that's based on our growth, which is FTE. What that does, it does shift operational dollars into capital. Amy can give you a little bit more. It was part of this year's budget, so she can give you a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, it is built in as a line item on our current capital plan for the next 5 years, so we'll continue to do that until the board says otherwise. But it's based on the calculation we had about the new students we have, coming in, and our property values as they're valued. So it is in on the capital plan, and so you'll see that line item, and I believe we have it in as growth incremental.
Right, yeah, it is. I made sure it was there. In fact, we had board members that were also checking to make sure it was there. And what we're trying to do is a little bit back to kind of one of your original comments was, you take growth and you say, all right, what piece of that has a capital impact, and you shift it over there as a justification. The difficulty, though, is I just want everybody to be clear, and this includes with the county commission's model, is that you're still shifting from one funding source to another. And the difference and you understand this with the county commission, they don't have to deal with the rollback rate the way we have to deal with the rollback rate. So they get more growth dollars than we get. Ours gets adjusted way back, and that limits what we're able to do.
Mrs. LaRiviere.
Yes, that's what I thought. They weren't actually getting more money. They just allowed them to move money from one category to another. So, it sounds great, but you're not really getting extra funds by doing it.
Right. Mrs. Morgan.
So it's 5 o'clock, and I guess my question is, my preference would be that Dr. Atkins and staff walk away from this meeting knowing that priorities for the budget that is under construction are something that we are comfortable with, and also walk away with the idea that we need to have another meeting and another conversation about where we're going long-term. I mean, is that a fair statement of what you'd like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes,
I
thank
think
you.
with the understanding that 18 months is not very long-term at all.
No, I understand.
And just really quickly on what Mr. Martin said about the impact, the purpose of an impact fee is to put the money where the impact is, and that other school districts throughout the state have said that, building an extra student station has a positive impact district-wide. I think our argument here in Lee County is even stronger because of student assignment. So I think that's one, Mark, that we can really push strongly with the county commission and.
School choice.
And I'll shut up for now.
Great.
But I will very much look forward to the 16th. Thank you, this was fun.
Thank you, Mrs.
You're welcome.
Patrica. Dr. Kuckel.
And I'd like to request that in all of these workshops where we have to collaborate with each other in decision-making, that we sit in a face-to-face setting. It's very hard when you can't see who's speaking or talk across the table or have conversation back and forth.
That being said, Mary did a great job controlling us. Ms. Fisher, I'm sorry.
Hardly. Any other than comments before we move on and decide that we are comfortable with the priorities that as listed, even though they aren't reflected in the survey? That is something different because everyone's looking at it from their own piece of the puzzle, I think. And so, as everyone else was talking, I was saying this is really a unique balancing act. And I think that with the efforts that we've made in generating revenue and the different adjustments that have been made departmentally, bringing people more together, condensing and doing more with less. And I think the other piece about continuing to educate the public about how we have had this tremendous growth over the years, and we still have so many millions less in our capital funding, which that piece, whenever I have an opportunity to speak to groups in the community, always gets them because they say, wow, well then it makes perfect sense for you guys to look at taking something to the voters in the form of a referendum. So I don't want to see us drop that ball, and I want us to continue that part of the conversation also. And yes, and Mrs. Patricia.
You mentioned, Pam, parental involvement or input in the budgeting process. Don't they have that through SACS already? Isn't that what SACS do? Or at least that's what we do at Pine Woods.
They have input, the parents and community members, business partners, have input in how money is dispersed for
School
the
improvement
school
plan.
improvement
Right.
plan,
Okay.
but not with regard to, oh heavens to Betsy, if they could tell the principal what to do with the money, we'd probably see different distribution of those funds for each school than we are currently seeing. So, no. There are parameters.
Too, and also there are variables. Just for instance, one example, as we continue to grow, I know that over the last few years, we've had a significant increase in our ESE population. And I see that that was one of the things that was at the top of the list that people had concerns about, and I think that that was largely in part due to the fast implementation of inclusion. However, I still think we're still doing more with less, dealing with more more difficult problems, and so I was wondering when it says ESE support, what does that look like?
I can give you a concrete example. The middle school principals made a request for the upcoming school year to help with being able to triage some of these behavioral issues relative to ESE, that they establish a resource room staffed with a teacher and a paraprofessional. So that requires a staff person, a teacher, a paraprofessional, and obviously the space. So this emerged as a priority from the principal leads. It also came out of our teacher advisory committee as a priority, which teacher advisory committee, that literally their recommendation resulted in the establishment of an ESE parent advisory committee, which as a result brought about that recommendation that we are forwarding, and I just talked to the principals that we are recommending that as a part of next year's budget based on that feedback that we've received. So that's one example of ESE support that came from this process that we're recommending moving forward for next year.
Is it true that we get more money per student for kids who have an IEP?
Yes,
Yeah.
and, yes.
So, and then back to Mr. Torber's comment about increase in spending for salaries and supplies. Well, I think that has gone along with the growth, and correct me if I'm wrong, does that have anything to do with the Chromebooks and other technology expenditures that we've had to make? And, right, okay. And so, then we're still, part of our argument to the public needs to be that we're dealing with this many more kids with no more money from the state. And so in our efforts to generate revenue and to be more efficient and effective, and I think that sometimes we have to spend money to save money, as we have done recently with our transportation and getting the new buses. And so I think that all those variables somehow need to be illustrated so that there's a clear understanding of how complex our budget process really is. Does anybody else have any? Mrs. LaRiviere?
When you mentioned the Chromebooks, part of it is understanding that you've got the supplies section, but underneath it are different funding categories. And within those funding categories, it has to be spent within a certain area. And that's where there are too many layers to our financial aspect that many people in the community have a hard time seeing those layers.
So some of the things we'll be sharing moving forward as we go through the budget process, and I may, again, I didn't prepare to get into this because I didn't want to, I wanted the board to have the opportunity to do the discussion. But as you look at, our operations division, if you look at their technology division, there's certainly some significant savings and cost reductions that are coming from those divisions. Last year, academic services did some significant reductions in what they were putting forward. So part of what you see in terms of cost increases in schools have come from some reductions that you'll see at the department level. Additionally, I was having a conversation with Mr. Davis, and this is something that continues to grow and be improved upon, but we capture savings through some of our recycling programs that we have with technology. He's talking about, being able to take a check down, or a staff member taking a check down for $50,000, earning like $440,000 from government deals, gov deals. There's significant savings that I think that as we move forward, we'll be able to educate you on, so you can be able to go out and speak to, well, here are some of the things that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't even talked about, fundraising and grants and things like that, but these are things that the district is doing to try to, use obsolete equipment, to make additional dollars for the district. We also are looking at the White Fleet. Mr. Law's looking at that, and I know that they have taken a number of our antiquated vehicles to auction, and I believe have a plan to take even more vehicles to auction. So like when I run around this building in the morning, you guys see that tremendous White Fleet, but very old vehicles. Well, we may need to move those on, and he's got a plan for that to happen. And speaking of the White Fleet, soon you'll see some White Fleet vehicles with wraparound advertising. That is another revenue stream for our district.
That's great. Okay, so then it's 5:14. So if we are going to continue this on May 16th, we can conclude this part of the presentation and the workshop and move on to, I'm assuming we're finished with board member discussion. Okay, so we'll move on to board attorney comments.
No, thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Atkins, do you have any further comments?
None at this time.
Okay, anything for the good of the order? Well, then, at 5:15, we will conclude this workshop meeting, and we'll regather at 5:45 for the student performance and at 6 o'clock for the action meeting. Thank you.